So anyway, there was a discussion, or apparently you and Mr. SMU had a discussion on the World Class show that is behind the paywall, I do believe,
Hmm.
um, about Iceman King Parsons, and it elicited some responses from the listeners. And I'm going to tell you, Ice. I started thinking about it. I read y'all's little conversation there, and I started thinking about it, and it led me to want to ask you this question. A few years ago, we did a top 5 on the most underrated wrestlers of all time. I think we had Tracy in there. Right? We might ought to do that list again sometime because I think it would be different.
Yeah, it evolves over time, just based on as you learn more and
Sure,
as you
we're
think more
always,
about it. Yeah.
unlike the average sap out there, you and I are always learning and growing.
Okay.
Boy, boy, you
All of
should
our
tell him.
listeners are always learning and growing. Harper's not always learning and growing,
No,
but
no, no,
everybody who
he's
listens
stuck.
is.
But if you told our wives that we're learning and growing, what would their response be?
They'd laugh. Doing what?
Right,
Talking about wrestling? That's
right.
stupid.
Yeah, yeah.
They
Anyway,
teeth sucking. That's what you'd get.
of course, of course.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's why we're doing this
Yeah.
though. So my question to you, certainly top 5 in my book now, but is Iceman King Parsons one of, if not the most underrated wrestler in our little period of history?
I can't say he's number one because then I'll start like thinking it more thoroughly. But for a guy who was not on like WWF TV, for a guy who really made his name in the territories, for a guy who in W World Class, WCCW was really on a big platform because I mean they were pretty much national. They didn't tour nationally, but during Iceman's heyday, they did the Von Erichs Over America tour later on in '87, '88. But that's completely different than when they were dying.
They got
But for,
TV up north, like in Boston and shit.
that's what I'm saying. So I mean, I know they went out of Dallas, Texas, and the surrounding areas a handful of times. I'll call it like that. But for a guy who, did not get the national platform of, like WCW Saturday Night, WWF, or Raw later on, or Nitro, dude, he's completely one of the most underrated and underappreciated stars of the territory era. Now there are probably other people who fit that bill who didn't get the like you hear the stories about like Ron Wright in his prime, right? But we've talked about Ron Wright. We think he's underrated and underappreciated, but we've kind of given him his due through the Smoky Mountain run. But Iceman, from a charisma standpoint, from a just being over as a babyface in the South. I know Texas is the Southwest, but I mean, in the 80s to be as over as he was as a black man, now, that's something. I mean, you and I live here. We know how it can be. Once you get outside of the Dallas area, man, he was loved. They loved him. They cheered for him. He was never as a face going to be the top face because the Von Erichs were here, but charismatic, in the ring, great, just a hell of a talent. He did quote unquote end up winning the World Class Wrestling Association because it was called WCWA title, even though it was World Class Championship Wrestling. He did end up winning the world title, if you want to call it that. But he's underappreciated and underrated. The promos, my God, the
Charisma,
dude, he had it all, bro. Like, I mean, he was
fucking bitches without rubbers.
like, and see, that's the other side. Like, most people don't know Ice on that level. Not that I was his best friend, but I got to be around him and hang around with him, a handful of
You got
times.
to hook him up.
He is he is hilarious.
Oh, I
He
could see that
he
100%.
is hilarious. He's like, I want to say this in the best way possible. He is a, how can I say this? I don't want this to come off the wrong way. he can fit in with the crowd. Like he
So
will
let me
mold.
let me let me offer you something here.
Mm-hmm.
So, um, I think one of the things he did that's very subtle, that's really amazing for where he wrestled in the country and the time he wrestled, because at the time he wrestled, it wasn't just hardcore wrestling fans because the Von Erichs had exploded this thing past just the hardcore wrestling fan to this was a happening. And so you had more people from straight society, if you will, coming in and sitting in those buildings. And to just say it, newsflash, but the 80s in this part of Texas was a pretty racist place to be.
Not towards Iceman though.
Well, and so here's the point. He did enough shuck and jive at a time when you had to be Sweet Brown Sugar who was in the promotion too, you know? I mean, that come on. He did enough of that, but he also, without any of that stereotypical black athlete stuff, got himself over on his own right and stood next to Chris Adams as on the Von Erichs team. That's good
Yeah.
stuff.
Like I said, I mean, he was as over could be for somebody like him. He
That
wasn't
was
going to
that
win.
was that was fourth, tied for fourth probably in the pecking order of the promotion on the
Yeah.
babyface.
Yeah, depending on like, well, once David dies, obviously. But yeah, I mean, pretty much.
And
And again,
here's the
I,
thing
I
that
know he
here
wins the world title later on. Like I know 87, 88, he wins their version of the
that's
world title.
different. I'm talking about
I
that
agree.
early run. Now here's the thing that brought up why I wanted to do this so that now we could say we're doing it. Is nobody talks about Iceman ever.
I know that's the part that's the thing that always gets
You
me.
listen to we all listen to these wrestling podcasts all the time, hours and hours. You never hear about Iceman. And
Never.
so hopefully what we just did causes somebody here to listen to go back, catch a video somewhere, watch an Iceman match, promo, something from that era, and appreciate what he brought to the business because I think it's a lot.
100%. Dude was good, bro. I
He
mean,
was, he was. I'm here for a reason, not for a season. I used to go my mom would say something to me like, "Why'd you do this?" And I'd be like, "It bees that way sometimes." You know,
uh,
I was using his promos to sass my parents. I wasn't using Carrie. I'm like, "It's like a cloud."
The Rock stole some of Ice's.
Rudy Poo.
Yeah,
He
yeah,
borrowed. How about that? He borrowed.
yeah. He bought. I mean, I'm not, like I don't mean it in a way that he disrespected him. I mean he. But the point is, you're right. You listen to all these podcasts out there, and man, people just don't like. He don't get his due. He just doesn't get his
He don't
due.
get nothing, man. He's like a forgotten man. You know, since he passed away, Tracy seems to be getting his due, and good for that. I ain't trying to say you got to rob Tracy to pay respect to Iceman. There's room for both. But Tracy gets a lot of respect these days since his passing, which is unfortunate too. But I just don't hear Iceman being talked about.
I
We
think
need to start Iceman for the world class. I mean, for the WWE Hall of Fame.
I think Iceman gets. I'm sorry. I think Tracy gets his due because he worked for Jim and Smokey, and with him working for Cornette, he had wide exposure from that. And Iceman and Tracy also, although not really good runs, he had his time in WCW, even if it's Saturday night, early '90s, and then
Even if he was from Wyoming.
right, ECW, and then again, Freddie Joe Floyd. Good lord. I mean, my point is he was on WWF TV, So Tracy had a little bit more national exposure at a later time when again Iceman had the national exposure world class, but I don't. It was just different. Anyway, he dude just doesn't get his due, and he deserves to get more of his due.